Good afternoon, everybody. So, welcome to what is hopefully the correct room for your SAT ACT presentation. My name is Matt Shagam. I have taught and tutored SAT prep, ACT prep in the Vermont area for about 15 years. I retired out of that at the beginning of COVID, but I'm still working with VSAC and happy to talk you through the basics of what is probably the biggest transition I've ever seen in my experience as a student, as a teacher, in the testing world as we transition to this new online testing. And so I'm going to do my best to answer as many questions as I can about this new world of online testing. And I'll talk through the basics, the content areas, which remain classically the same, and basically what you can do to start preparing for these tests, as well as what do colleges do with them a little bit, and just talking about, as the presentation goes on, any questions that you may have. One thing I am going to stay away from, except for maybe a few questions, is the actual technology of the new online testing. I've got the dates, I've got as much as I can kind of tell you about what's going on, and we've got the first sample from the last March test of students who went through it, but it's a pretty wild and woolly new world. And with that, I'll go ahead and start the presentation officially, and we will get going. Here we go, screen two. All right, so should be coming up the first on the presentation there. Hi, everybody. And so the first thing about standardized testing is what is this thing? What is standardized testing meant to do? And we had thought at the beginning, we being many in the testing world, that with COVID and the beginning of this, surge in test optional schools, that we might be seeing the end of standardized testing as one of the big measuring tools for student admissions. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it is going to remain with us because it appears that it actually helps underadvantaged students compete on a more level playing field. Because for all the other inequalities of our education system, it's one test, one day, with everybody else in that room with you, more or less. So a lot of advantages that may be there in the background might not transition to the testing environment for many students who otherwise might not have an opportunity to shine in front of a school like the Ivies or what have you. But the first thing to start with is to understand that tests are not really an obstacle to you going to college. They're a way for perhaps to you to demonstrate to a more competitive college that you're prepared for their, curriculum, the difficulties, whatever they may be throwing at you. But at the end of the day, it really isn't an obstacle for you to be able to go to college and succeed. There's approximately 3,300 four-year colleges in the United States. Highly competitive colleges make up maybe about 300 of them or so, or less. Most schools are looking for students who are able to demonstrate proficiency on core academic elements. And so the idea of that is that if you are in the average of the students that they take, then you are probably doing well on the tests, and these are the scores that you need to be in the range for. If you've reached them, great. If not, you need to do a little practice. But the rule of thumb I help people to kind of gauge where do you need to be is what percentage of the students who apply there get rejected? You need to be above that in terms of your test percentage performance, and we'll talk about that. But the basic idea is if they reject 90% of their applicants, you need to be above that 90th percentile mark, just as a rule of thumb. One thing I'm going to say is that if you have specific questions about specific colleges, you should reach out to them and ask them directly. It is fine to reach out to an admissions office and ask them what their testing policy is, especially in this day and age where schools are changing their policies every year. Test optional now, of course, a lot of schools are rolling out this option of taking AP tests. We are not going to talk about that particular path, but for many students, taking a battery of AP tests may make more sense than the SAT or the ACT. Just putting that out there. But what the colleges want to do is they want to see what you can do on a good day. They're not really concerned with low scores. There's a lot of reasons why students might take a test and perform poorly, but with a well-designed test, there's only one reason a student would take a test and do well. It's because they have the core proficiencies to be able to perform at that level. And, we all have things that go on in our life. You could have a bad day, traffic accident on the way to the test, real bad life events in the background. Could be any reason why a student has a poor test. So what colleges do is that they want to take your best scores. They either take your best single time out score or they super score your test. So they take the different sections across different administrations and they take your best subsection on across all of your different test dates, test administrations. So if you did well on English on the first time you took it and not so well on math, and the next time you did better on the math, well, they'll take those two good scores and they'll mix them together in the super score approach. So, and that varies from college to college because different colleges feel they get different results from using tests in different ways. And the ultimate upshot is, though, is that I've never heard of a college that looks at those lower test scores and says, we want to include those. Because again, there's a lot of reasons why students take these tests, and there's a lot of reasons why a student might not do well on a single administration. But the upshot, what I want you to take away from this is it doesn't hurt to take a test and not do well on it. You will always, let me rephrase that. You will not be penalized for doing that. You will only be seen for your best scores using one approach or the other. After that, let's talk a little bit about the timeline. So, generally speaking, I'm hoping everybody here is either a sophomore or a junior about to get ready. If you're a senior, you have probably missed the timing window for this year. You're probably going to be looking at next year or rolling admissions, which is absolutely fine. Plenty of students do that. But I'm hoping everybody here is a sophomore or a junior. And if you're a junior, now's the time you want to start. You want to take a test as soon as you can, get in there, especially with all of this online stuff going on. It's very terrible and confusing. Get in there, get your feet wet, get the sense of the test and how you're doing, and then decide, what do I need to do to get to the colleges that I'm looking at? Or am I looking at any scholarship programs? Is there anything else that needs particularly high scores or what have you? Make those decisions late spring, spend the summer working on them, and then try to hit those tests in the fall and get the scores that you're looking for. So if you're a sophomore, you're in the position that you can start taking practice tests now. You get to have a much slower runway. That makes things more achievable, less stressful. And with all of that, I want to make sure everyone's aware of what's going on with the rollouts for these digital tests. SAT is digital only now. You got to take it on your iPad or your laptop or whatever it is. I've been looking at the device standards this morning to see if there were any changes in the recent past. But basically, you download this Blue Book application where you write all your answers into it, and that's basically how they're going to be handling that. ACT is being administered at test centers on test dates, and I should be clear. Both the SAT and ACT, regardless of format, are all test date linked tests still. Maybe the parents out there might remember graduate tests when you could make your own appointment and go in and do them. That's still there for the graduate students. It's not there yet for the SAT and ACT students. And I haven't heard of any plans to roll out that kind of, you can schedule it whatever date works for you at the test center plans yet. They're always talking about doing it, just not really feasible yet for the number of students they're servicing. So we've got if you're a paper-based student, if you really do not want to take this online test, your option is the ACT and taking it on one of the paper test well, they're all the same dates, but taking the paper test on the ACT administration test. SAT is online only going forwards. So one of the things about computer adaptive testing that I want to talk to students about that really makes it such a difficult, stressful thing is that you only go forwards on the computer adaptive tests. You answer the question, you either get it right or you get it wrong. You don't find out on the spot. You're just presented with a new question. You cannot skip questions and go back, generally speaking. I think they're going to try and make that possible in some way. But generally speaking, you answer the question that's in front of you and you move forwards. The upshot of this is that it always feels extremely stressful to take take a computer adaptive test, because what it's looking for is what's the highest difficulty of failure you can achieve at. So what's the hardest question you answer one correct and then the next one wrong? Where is your difficulty slash frustration level with that? So with computer adaptive testing, if it feels like you are really struggling, you're doing as well as you can. That's actually a good sign. Kind of trust the difficulty, because that shows you that you're really engaging with the test and you know what's going on. If you're just getting question after question and they seem like they're getting easier, you're not doing great. So it's a very unusual feeling, and just be aware of it so you don't feel overwhelmed by that sense of pressure. It's part of the test. And in fact, if you're feeling it, you're doing well. Feeling like you're falling behind means you're doing just fine, in other words. So let me just make sure. I'm seeing the chat here. Let me stop here. Okay. So I am seeing, okay. Make sure I take a moment and take a look at the questions here. And here we go. Should we take the test? And so that's a pretty high level question. And let me say this. The answer is that I think students should be taking the tests. And the reason why, as much as they're a barrier, obstacle, pain in the neck, expense, all of this other stuff, is that the reason why they are bringing them back and they're coming back is because students who are underrepresented in the test optional path, they're more likely to apply if they've got good test scores to schools that seem out of their reach. It's a way to build confidence in your own application. And that seems to actually have a significant enough of effect that schools that very much would love to abandon these tests, these schools don't require them because they like them. They require them because it tells them something that's useful about their applicant pool. And I think it's been a little bit of a surprise to everybody that that has turned out to be, in fact, the effect of taking away these tests is that the applicant pools became less equal rather than more, as to all the different backgrounds. And geographic regions is a big issue as much as any other category. So I am encouraging students to think about continuing to take it. Um, the other piece that I have a question here is, what are the prospects and value of studying to retake and raise scores? So the answer is you should test, retest. We'll talk a little bit about this, and we're going to talk a little bit about, what you should do. But the answer is yes, you absolutely can improve your scores on these tests. The simple fact of the matter is, if you've never taken one before, you read the instructions, you understand the test, you're going to do better the second time you take it. You tend to see students improve from first test to second test just on its own, just because they become more familiar with the test. But generally speaking, yes. The College Board used to say for a very long time, no, 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 our tests are designed such that you cannot improve your scores. There is also a tremendous amount of waste in the test prep industry, very frankly. And there's a lot of materials that just get handed to students that don't have any explanations or path for how this connects to student improvement. The good news is that there are better materials than there used to be. The Khan Academy system is good. It does work for students. I've actually had the opportunity to talk to their people who do the data analysis. They do see improvements. About 20 hours in is about 100 points or more. So in terms of your ability to raise your scores, yes, you can improve. And we will talk a little bit about that as we're going through. Very good. So let me take that question out of the screen there, because I think that might have been appearing in everyone's eyes, but at least we get to see it. So guessing strategy, two completely different guessing strategies for paper versus computer, right? Just make life a little bit more difficult. So the guessing strategy for a paper-based test is this: go through the test, answer every question that you feel that you can. If you can't answer the question, leave it blank. At the end of the section, look over your answer sheet. Figure out which answer you feel you have answered the least among all of your options. Guess that into all of the blanks. So for paper-based tests, skip questions you don't know how to answer at all. If you can eliminate some answers, take your best shot right then and there. But otherwise, skip questions, leave them blank until the end of the section. Then at the end of the section, go ahead, figure out the letter you've answered the least, guess that letter into all of the blanks. Statistically speaking, that letter, because it showed up the least in the questions you did answer, is overrepresented in the questions you didn't answer, because there has to be an equal distribution of all of the answer choices across the whole test. And the reason why is because they cannot design a test where one student who Christmas trees at all A winds up with a better score than the kids who Christmas tree at B, C, D, what have you. So there's an equal distribution of answers across the test. Guess into the blanks, the answer you feel you've answered the least frequently. SAT, there is really no guessing. Computer adaptive test, there's really no guessing strategy. You just take your best shot on the question and you move on, because that's kind of some of the behavior that the computer adaptive test is designed to defeat, that kind of test strategy and planning. But it doesn't make a huge difference, but at least now you know the optimum guessing strategy for a paper-based test. So moving along, we have got the ACT percentile chart. There isn't anything too much that is really super important about the percentiles, except having some sense of how these scores, these weird like 25, 36, 800, whatever numbers, actually translate to what colleges care about. And what that is here is you can see the scores on the left. These are the ACT scaled scores. And these are the percentiles that they correspond with. So you can roughly see the 50th percentile for an ACT across a composites right here around 20. And then the 90th percentile, we come on up and we see that's around the 28, 29 mark. And then the 99th percentile, roughly speaking, the middle 90s is around 32. And then 34 and up is about the 99th percentile. So just so you have some sense, because at the end of the day, it's the percentiles that the colleges are looking at. Again, they use their own internal algorithms and secret sauces and what have you, but they want to know percentage-wise, at the end of the day, where do you rank against the other students who are applying to this school? SAT percentiles for total score. Again, very similar distribution. You can kind of see here we are. If we've got the at 1600, we find 800 over here, where we're a little further down here. Here we are. And so the 50th percentile on the new scaled score, the new rescale, I should say, is around 1,000 on the SAT. And you can see that right there. You should be able to with my little laser pointer there. Excuse me. I want to point out the SAT reports nationally representative sample and SAT user. And so the idea is they're trying to tell colleges how to look at these scores for students in general and the specific students who select to take the SAT. Because basically the idea is SAT users, people who take these tests, they do a little better than the average student because they're a little more aggressive, a little more, desirous of a highly competitive college admission. So they tend to score a little bit higher, it's a little more difficult competing against them, against students in general who are just not interested in the same college track. So that's why the College Board is trying to report two different sets of scores. At the end of the day, I haven't heard much in terms of what colleges are doing with the nationally representative sample. They basically want the SAT user number. They want to know how you're doing against the other students taking this test. Alrighty, so moving right along. Very good. That's the breakdown by sections. We can move through this I'm happy to answer questions if people do, but I want to get into kind of some of the meat of the presentation, which is about to answer that question a little bit we had a few moments ago in more detail. That what do you do to improve your scores? How do you do it? What are these tests about? So very clearly, especially right now, you need to be taking practice tests. You need to be downloading the Blue Book on the College Board website. You need to be going to the ACT website because there's a paper-based test. You should be trying to figure out whether you want to take the ACT paper or the ACT online, but you need to know those formats. Just very straightforward. These are timed tests where at the end of the day, you are being compared against the other students who take these tests. One way of thinking a standardized test is that it's just a glorified way of ranking everybody in the room with you. And with the ACT, that's basically true. They do scale them based on the administration, the students that you take that test with. So if you take the test with a cohort of really, really capable students, like imagine you're going to take the test on, take your, genius to test day and all the other kids are like levitating pencils with your mind. You get every question on the test right, but one. You just get one question wrong. All the other students, every other single one of them's got a perfect, they got every question right. You get a 1, they get 36s. That's the way scaling works. It's just about ranking you versus everybody else. And conversely, if you take the test on National Take Your Pet to Test Day, and it's very cute puppies and kitties, and they can't use the pencils, and it's very sad for them, but you don't do very well. You just get one question right, every other question wrong. But, the cats, kittens, they don't get anything right at all. You got one question right, they got 0. You have a 36, and all the little furry animals have zeros or ones. So that's the idea. So if you are in any way in a better position than the other students who are surrounding you because of your own diligence, your hard work, fantastic. You have taken points out of their pockets. Both test makers make actual former tests available, and right now they're trying to push materials onto students because they are very terrified of being accused of having a digital barrier to student success. So Khan Academy has many, many, many hours of specific content area. So basically, at the end of the day, yeah, you do improve from learning test strategy. But it's only so much. At the end of the day, if you really want to go far, if you're really down there, you're at that 1100 range, you're looking at a school that's 1500. I have seen students make those kinds of improvements, but the way that they make them is that they go back and they learn the fundamental skills that are between them and those scores. So you'll experience a moderate improvement from going through 2 to 3 practice tests. You'll understand the test better. You go through the questions, you pick up a few things from doing that. You will improve a little bit. And so if you're looking at, an 1120 and the school you're looking at is 1200, you can probably get there just by taking some practice tests. If you're looking at a 1400 or 1450, you're going to have to get into the actual concrete material that you need to know. So both tests cover this basic content area. They've got math, that's basic arithmetic, your basic 4 operations. You've got algebra, you've got 1 variable, 2 variable. You're going all the way up into, there's less geometry than it used to be. ACT does not give you a formula, but if you need to know it, so mostly they give it to you on the problem. But they do expect you to be pretty familiar with a lot of the basic geometry formulas on the ACT. SAT will give you the formula bank, and you should use it. And we'll talk about how to practice with the formula bank in a little bit. But you're going all the way through your algebra, geometry course up to basic trigonometry on both tests now. And there are some statistics and number properties. So what happens when you raise a negative number to a various exponents? What happens when you multiply a certain series of negative numbers? Those kinds of patterns. SAT also includes free response math questions, so do be aware of that. I had one student when early in these electronic tests were rolled out who totally did not realize there was a free response section and just clicked through it and didn't recognize it, and it was fine. She's went to a great school, but we try to avoid those things. So at the end of the day, in terms of math, yes, you want to be actually going to Khan Academy, watching the videos on the other parts of the section, and really digging into those math skills and trying to refurbish them to be able to improve your scores, because especially with the math sections, trick strategies only go so far. Okay, what is a free response math question? That's where I don't give you 5 options. I just go, what number is it? 2 plus 2 is 1, is A, B, C, D, E, or 2 plus 2 is blank, write in the answer. Blank, write in the answer is free response. Exactly. You can answer any number. Just so you know, it always has to be positive. There are no negative answer responses on the free response questions. Just kind of a quirk, I think, of how they structured the scanners and the input more than anything. And apparently even options, even answers are twice as common as odd answers. Not really sure why that is. I just put that out there. It's one of those factoids I've heard over the years. So if you're guessing blindly to free responses, or if you got a negative answer, something went wrong. But if you're guessing, guess an even number. Critical reading is the next big area. And as we know on the SAT, they've got this merged critical reading English format where they ask grammar questions right alongside reading comprehension questions. ACT still keeps those sections separate. So we'll talk specifically about the critical reading strategies. You have 4 content types. You've got prose fiction, social science, humanities, and natural science. Prose fiction is something from a novel or a short story. What these questions are asking about invariably are going to be about how do authors create characters that have different personalities that the reader knows about? How do they, create dramatic tension between opinions that characters have about each other? Prose fiction is about characters, characterization, character analysis. How does an author create these characters and create a story about conflict between them? Social science is usually more, and let me say, some of these passages are just going to be straightforward. Here's a thing that happened, and here are some basic questions about it. Higher difficulty passages in the nonfiction section are going to focus on more or less high level issues or high level things you encounter frequently in that. And in social science, you run into a lot of arguments, essentially arguments between experts. You might be talking about urban design, you might be talking about recycling, you might be talking about, an arts movement in the 19th century. But at the end of the day, the social science passages at the higher difficulty are going to be, why do experts disagree with other experts? How do you infer that they're disagreeing? What do they agree about? And what are the issues that they come to different positions on? And how do they get there? Humanities is about art. It's going to be about architecture, music, painting, sculpture, dance, poetry. And what it really tends to be about is, how do we talk about the development of art and artists in the sense of inspiration or development? Was Leonardo inspired by the Greeks? And they'll have some kind of passage and they'll talk about it. And maybe the expert will say, yeah, Michelangelo was, or Leonardo wasn't. You need to be able to look at that passage and go, ah, yes, Leonardo was inspired by the Greeks, because there'll be a place where it talks about it. Because the answer choices, remember, on every single reading passage, 3 of those answer choices are specifically designed to trap you. One of them's probably pretty obvious, but the other 2 are usually a little bit more sophisticated, and they'll take things that were said in the passage and misattribute them or twist something to make them incorrect. Natural science is going to be about what you normally consider science. So it could be, they like volcanoes a lot, they like oceanography, they like environmental issues in biology. I have seen some, interesting chemistry passages in the critical reading. But the basic idea is, why were we wrong at the higher difficulty critical reading science passage? What did we think? How did we go about testing, examining it, determining what actually happened? And then how did we look back, or how do we know what is now correct in terms of a scientific phenomenon? So, we thought eels did this thing, and then for 50 years we thought they did it. Then we did this new research. We found eels do something else. Now we know eels are completely different from whatever we had ever thought before. Very cool. That's the kind of idea of natural science. How do our knowledge base develop over time? So there's an often question, should I read the passage first or should I read the questions first? And the answer is the passage first. You do want to read the passage first. You don't want to try and memorize it. You don't want to get bogged down, but you want to at least know where things show up in the passage, so that when you go to the questions and you go, I'm not sure about this, I need to go back to the passage, you know where to look in the passage. And that's ultimately why you're reading the passage first, not for mastery, and not even necessarily for comprehension, but for location reference, to make sure that you know where to go back to answer these questions. So this is getting very weird in the online world. You can't really write brief notes. You're supposed to have highlighter features on the software. I don't know how that's going to work for students. Definitely practice it. Make sure you're familiar, because what you do want to do is you want to go through the passage, and you'll see in the handouts that you have with you, I have taken a model ACT passage, and I did that in time. I answered those questions in time. It's been years since I did that, but that is a very thorough but somewhat realistic approach to how you might mark up a passage. And sometimes, what works for different students is fine. I've had students who did nothing but underline the first sentence and last sentence of major paragraphs and done very well, especially students who struggle with literacy disabilities. That can be a powerful strategy to help anchor you, even just visually, in the passage, to break it down and digest it. So you want to go through the passage quickly first, then, maybe taking some quick notes, identifying any key things. If you're looking at a prose fiction passage, I encourage students to circle the first time a character appears, so that they know where all the characters are, who they are, who's being asked about, and they've got some kind of quick visual reference to break it down a little. So do something like that, and then read the question stem, try to predict your best answer, look back to the passage if you have to, and then go ahead and answer them. SAT also has double linked questions, and I encourage students on the SAT, or at least I did. I should probably take this out now, because they're going to be in the computer adaptive model. You can't go backwards. So you have to actually answer the question and then say where you got that, from. Used to be take a look through the passage, boom, great, find those questions, because then as you're going through the passage, you're going to need to look at the specific, question, and it's a little easier. Right now, the reason why you break down the passage is to be able to handle these double linked questions more effectively. And right now, that's the best strategy I have for those in the new computer adaptive format. So moving to the multiple choice writing. So this is grammar. And so I want to tell you about some of the biases of grammar on this test. And I don't mean bias in like a gender or racial way. I mean, if you have an underlined section, and both tests do this, and you are offered alternative revisions, so we're going to rewrite this underlined section, what are they looking for? They're looking for the most correct, relevant, and concise answer. And concise is the secret sauce here. It means short. If you have two answer choices on a grammar question that you're not sure, they both look the same, one's shorter than the other, they both look grammatically correct though, and that's the key thing, they're grammatically correct, always pick the shorter one. You do not have to worry about it. It is a built-in, baked-in structural grammar bias of the English tests. If two answer choices are grammatically correct, always take the shorter one. I had a student who was a really good writer, really bright young guy, and had won awards for writing. He took the ACT, he scored a 19. That is not consistent with a student who had his level of otherwise academic ability. So I go, well, what's going on? And I go, okay, you pick correct, concise, relevant. He goes, oh, I've been picking the longest answer choice because that's the one that always sounds best to me. And so with that rule, literally one test to the next, 19 to 26. Fastest improvement on a section I've ever seen because he was just doing it backwards. That simple. You do it the way they want you to, so to speak, and picking a shorter answer choice, it can really power your scores up. So the digital SAT has the standard English questions mixed into the reading section. How will you identify them? And the answer is pretty straightforwardly. They're going to underline the section, and then you're going to have no change, and then 3 revisions of that. There'll be virtually nothing else in the way of a question stem. Critical reading questions will always have a fairly wordy question stem. That's something along the lines of, which of the following does the author say was critical to Michelangelo's inspiration from the Greeks? Okay, great. You got this big, long, wordy question stem. That's not a grammar question. That's a critical reading question. And so that's how you can figure out which is which as you're going through. So let me make sure I am moving quickly, because we do have a little bit to get through. So grammar to cover, make sure you understand subject-verb agreement in English. So the dog runs versus the dogs run. So in English, either the noun or the verb has an S, generally speaking, in the present simple tense. And you do need to know how that works because they love to do the dog, comma, scared by the noise, comma, run away from the noise. Well, you can hear it the way I say it, but when you're reading it and they put that intervening phrase, that appositive there, the ear cannot quite catch that as well. But that's what I mean by subject-verb agreement. Pronouns and prepositions, I and me and we and he and she, those are all pronouns. Prepositions are the location words: for, by, at, from, towards. Got to know how those things work. Punctuation, basically the big marks in English. You got the period, the comma, the apostrophe, the semicolon, and the hyphen or the dash. Those are the big 5 punctuation marks. I'll slow down and repeat those again. Period, comma, apostrophe, hyphen, semicolon. And I should say full colon as well, hyphen, dash. And then usage. So these are just kind of idiomatic things. Do you use further or farther? English, we make a difference between countable nouns and uncountable nouns. So for today, we are further along in our studies of the SAT. We're not farther along in our studies of the SAT because it's not a length, it's not a measurement. We can't measure how far we have gone, whereas when we're walking down the road, we can measure how far we have gone. So further is used for uncountable things, farther is used for specifically countable things. Again, much or many similar there. So review your grammar. Coming right along, I'm skipping the SAT essay. It should really come out. I have no idea what people are doing with it, and I want to focus on what we can really help you with, and I'm happy to answer specific questions as we go along. Actually, the SAT essay is gone. I take it back. That's why we're not talking about it. ACT 6 paragraph format. So what the ACT is doing is they give you three different positions on a topic. You basically pick one of them and support it. You can completely make up evidence. These are not tests. This is a writing test. They want to know when you go to college in a few months, if you actually take the course and you have the knowledge, do you know how to put an essay together? Don't worry about making up facts. You can do that. You can make up quotes. You can make up data. You can make up statistics. They're not looking for that. This is a writing exam. Do you know how to structure an argument? Do you know how to say, here's what the argument's about, here's the positions, and then here's my thesis statement in an opening paragraph? Ideally with like a cute hook if you can think of one, but basically you get the idea that this is a pure writing exam. They're not looking at your ability to come up with great new ideas or have a big bank of knowledge. You are being graded as if this was a good first draft. You do not have to worry about specific errors reducing your score. It is only when the test becomes illegible, unreadable, or incomprehensible that you will be docked for grammar points. Um, there's the 5 goals of education. They've expanded what their topics. They used to be more about school and what you were encountering. They're starting to talk more broadly about social experiences. So I'm going to leave that one alone for the moment. And the way that they read it is that you are read by 2 separate readers. They give you their scores if they are within a point of each other. They're added. If there's a greater than a point difference, it goes to a third reader whose score is then doubled. And that's how they do those. Write as much as you can. Length corresponds to score more strongly than anything else. It can't be total garbage and you can't use giant handwriting, but you want to write as much as you can possibly crank out in the amount of allotted time. Um, just keeping an eye on the time, sorry. Finally, we've got the ACT Science section. ACT Science will have maybe one question about background knowledge in science. In other words, you only have to know background knowledge of science to answer maybe one question. All the rest of it is about, do you understand the scientific method? Can you read charts and graphs and take data off of them? And can you understand why 2 scientists might disagree about the conclusion to be drawn from data? Because you have 3 passages that are basically they're experiments. They're laid out for you. You analyze what would be, the effect of changing a certain element of these experiments. Then you're going to have 3 passages, which are basically a mess of charts and data and graph. And they're going to ask you to pull out relationships or to correctly identify information on those charts and graphs. And then they're going to have a paired passage where anywhere from 2 to 4 scientists argue about a given phenomenon and try to explain it in different ways. And you have to analyze why this scientist says this, what is the data that they're agreeing with, disagreeing with, but it's about the agreements and disagreements of scientists. And when I say anchor, like you want to touch these charts, you want to be putting your hands on the passages. You really want to try and be way more tactile with the ACT science section than you're probably naturally prepared to be, because it is just, they're so precise in terms of like, what temperature is it at like X pressure? And you got to go over to the pressure and you got to draw up a straight line because it's going to need to be pretty accurate. So be prepared to put hands on the ACT science section. Um, however it works for you, putting a finger as a straight line, anchoring with a point, using fingers as a bracket. Again, this is your test. Take it the way that, as long as within the rules, you can help yourself identify this relevant information by being very, again, tactile with it. So finally, kind of closing and time for a few questions. So yes, the College Board new blue book. No, new Khan Academy. That's where you want to go. They've still got the blue books floating around. They're good for extra practice. When you need just extra math work, but we all know because of the computer adaptive test, you should be using for the SAT, the paper book only as extra practice because you've used everything else available online. ACT Inc., they've rolled out a new version of their Red Book. It's got some new tests in it, and that tells you I've been doing this for way too long. I know how many revisions of old tests they have. But in any event, ACT is still on paper. So if you are thinking paper, get the official ACT Red Book. You can get it from your school's guidance department. They can usually have copies on hand. ACT and SAT pamphlets are both available online. The ACT test still is available. They give you the printable, downloadable ones. Khan Academy, and they also have on the ACT, their website's terrible. I'm sorry, it's just a mess, but they do have online components to be able to practice for the computer program as well. SAT has been, College Board has been a lot better about this. They've contracted with Khan Academy for years now to put free test prep materials up on their website, and they are good. And they do link to the Khan Academy actual academic material. So that right now, if you're looking for what's out there, what's the best stuff to start with, it is the Khan Academy website. It's quite good. And like I said, I've had the pleasure of knowing some of their data people, and they really do want to see students improve on these tests from using their website. And they do the best they can. Otherwise, Wikibooks, why is that there? Because again, if you're reviewing material, Khan Academy is great. It really has changed the way that, you have access to materials, and certainly YouTube. There's a lot of great math and other subject teachers on YouTube as well. But if you're looking for the old-fashioned books, here's a grammar manual. Wikibooks, they have all the math and all of the grammar stuff. Freerice.com, my belief, it's kind of a last piece of it, is that a lot of this is a vocabulary test in terms of the critical reading section. If you don't know the words, you will not be able to read the passage. And even though they've gotten rid of the old, similes and analogies and all that stuff, and they do still have some discrete vocabulary questions, which of the following would be the best to replace this word with, and you select which word means the same thing. But if you're not understanding 90% or more of the vocabulary that you are reading on that page, you will not be able to complete the passage either in time or with a sufficient accuracy to indicate mastery. So vocabulary does matter, even if it's not explicitly being tested. And I just encourage students to practice and brush up on their vocabulary, especially if you've got time as a sophomore. And that's why we've got the Greek and Latin roots list. It's actually really good. And you can really power up your vocabulary building by just recognizing more and more common Greek and Latin roots, and then breaking the words down and using that to analyze what the word means in context. And everybody, that is it. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions. You are welcome to email me. I believe my email is in the handout, but it's just mshagam@gmail.com. I'm going to put that in the chat so everybody can see it. I do not tutor. I'm retired from active tutoring, but I do still try to answer questions and send people in directions that I can where they can get assistance. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody.
Oh, Matt, this is Jessica. There's a question in the chat. Are there benefits to any of the different SAT prep courses?
Yeah, okay. So I did get a start for one of the big test companies. They are very expensive compared to what you get. And if that is not an issue for your family, great. You can find great people who will help you with that. Working with a live tutor is, I think, pretty well accepted as the fastest way to improve scores. With that said, it is not so much. I wouldn't be speaking, for example, whether or not you should take Kaplan or Princeton. I don't have that level of opinion about one over the other. It is much more about your own goals, and ideally trying to find somebody that you can get access to be able to help you as a tutor. And I think it is actually much more valuable if you have somebody in your community, somebody that you know personally who's a good math tutor, to do that and to go down that route than to go through one of the big test prep companies. 90% of what you are going to get from those companies, you can get from the books you can buy off of Barnes and Noble, and then meet with somebody who's good at the subject and who can actually tutor you, and then work that book with them and kind of chew it up. You're going to get a lot of the value way more cheaply, way quicker than going through like Princeton Review or Kaplan, in my opinion. With that said, there's nothing wrong with them. I just think they're expensive for what you get, and that's my opinion on that.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. All right, folks. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and I don't mean to keep anybody. One of the things, oh, there we go. Any advice for a 13-year-old homeschool who's trying to attend college early at 14? At least in terms of test prep, my thought would be take the time to get the score that you need for the school that you need. And while I understand the desire of accelerated admission, if you're that young, take the time to get the scores to get where you need to be. But I'll leave it at that. So my email there, Jackass, should be just a little bit above. You see M Shagam above. Go ahead and put that in the chat again.
And Matt, we have one question in the room. Can we ask you one more question?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Hi. Is there any information as yet on how the new digital SAT is impacting the scores? Are they coming in higher, lower, about the same as they used to?
I have not seen anything public yet about the March administration beyond the articles where they go and they interview the students and they're like, I hated it, I loved it. And so the short answer is no, I don't know at this moment that we have, any real idea of how this impact was. I'm glad that the tests are coming back for a good reason, apparently. Like it does appear to be that disadvantaged students benefit from these. I'm very worried. People with disabilities and people who, struggle with screens, who are, more tactile learners are going to have a lot of trouble with this. And um, I think that this is going to be a long road, and I think we're going to see a lot of students go to the ACT who benefit from that paper modality, or at least just like having something more consistent to practice with as what's, they're going to see on test day. So my kind of answer is, let me say this: colleges don't care which test you take, by the way. So if you like the paper-based ACT, if that works for you, take it. It's not going to hurt you. Basically, they've gotten rid of it used to be SAT was salt water, ACT was fresh water, i.e. the coastal students took the SAT, the Midwestern students took the ACT. That's all gone. The colleges don't want that as an artificial barrier to admission. Yes. So Anita, I'm very weird. I'm kind of, oh, I know why. Okay. Here we are. I think I've got the email to everybody. I was sending it just to our host here. So there we go. Everybody should be
Yeah.
seeing that now. So
And Matt,
thank
when you get a chance, we have another question in the room. I know we're going over time, so
No, I'm just I'm
Okay.
happy to answer questions. I thank you all for letting me appear remotely just because of the weather today. I'm just got plowed out about 15 minutes before we started. But next question, happy to answer it.
Yes, Matt, I just have two clarifying questions that you said about the new test. The first one, you said there's no essay for the SAT. There's no longer an essay portion.
That's right. That's what I understand. They've gotten rid of that, and I just want to double check that that is true. But yeah, that should be gone.
And then the second one was, you said there is a bank for the formulas for the math in the SATs.
That's right. So, in the handouts, you should see, yes, thank you for asking that. So in the handouts, there should be a formula bank. And what you should do when you practice is every time you have to look at that formula bank, put a little check next to the formula. Because as you approach test day, you will be building up your math skills in terms of actually analyzing questions and not getting bogged down on questions where you just don't remember the formula, because that's an easy fix, right? You remember the formula, you get the question right. So as you're reviewing with that formula bank, check each time next to the formulas that you're going through. And as you go along, yes, the SAT does have a graphing calculator now built into it. It is one of the new features for equal access. Make sure you practice it though, because using a graphing calculator cold for the first time, it's nightmarish. Just switch up a Sony for a Texas Instruments. That's real geek hours, but it does matter.
Matt, we have another question in the room.
So yes, how do we get the handouts? So if the handouts are not there, here's what we're going to do. You are going to be in touch with me. So I put my email in the chat, mshagam@gmail. So I do have the handouts handy. So I will basically.
Matt, the handouts are available on VSAC's website, and I have put the
Yes.
link. I'll put it again so people have that.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Very
Anita.
good.
And Matt, can we do one more question from the room and then we'll wrap up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm taking the ACT next month, and I'm kind of like, what's your strategies on because everything's timed and timing makes me kind of anxious. So what's your strategies on that? Like struggling with time and whatever. Even though I have extra time, but still I want to be diligent with the time.
Absolutely. Huge topic. And the first thing you do with timing is, what scores are you looking for? If you have an idea of the schools and what you're looking at, you want to figure out how many questions does that mean you need to get correct. So let's say you're shooting for somewhere around a 28. That's going to be, for the math section, it's about 45 questions correct. So your target is to get through 45 questions. And if you know that you're going to struggle with those last 10, then what you're really going to say is, I'm going to work through 1 through 50. And I'm going to put my time there, because if I put extra time on the 1 through 50, I might get to that 45 questions, where if I try to do all 60, I'm not going to get there because I need a little more time on some of these questions. So the first thing you do is you try to work backwards from the score you want to figure out the timing that you need to get to. But a part of it is practice. A part of it's familiarization with the material on the test in terms of how the test is formatted. It is something that you can definitely improve. I tend to find students can improve timing by about a third. So if it takes you about 12 minutes to get through a passage, you can get that to about 8-9 minutes with good practice and good strategies and being familiar with the test. So it's not insurmountable. There are a lot of ways to try and improve it, but it's something that you kind of figure out as you go through multiple tests and you figure out your own goals, is how to get the timing better. I'm sorry I have to give such a limited answer there, and because it is
That's
a really big topic.
Yeah,
And
thank you. Thank you, Matt. I think it's time to transition to the next session.
very good, very good.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.